are here today in the studio, and I have Chris and Jude with me. We're doing something a little bit different where I think, a lot of what we try to do in terms of putting things out there that are informative, we write a ton. We have the podcast. Some of these topics aren't interesting to people regardless of the format.
Yeah.
But sometimes the writing, I've gotten feedback more than a few times about that's just too long. And I think the same thing with the podcast. So with this idea, which we're calling Off the Page, the idea is to have useful conversations about maybe complicated topics or confusing topics, and in a way where we're communicating to be understood and keeping that, in a 15, 20-minute conversation. So for this first one, Jude and Chris are joining me to talk about investment policy statements. Very exciting stuff, also known as IPSs. But I think, this is the perfect example of our industry loves our jargon, right?
Exactly.
The average person day to day, they don't know what any of this stuff means, and we do a very poor job of communicating it. So hopefully we can, at the very least, move the ball down the field a little bit here and have a little fun.
Mm-hmm.
So, and by the way, credit to Kaylee for coming up with Off the Page.
Yes, exactly. Right.
She nailed it.
So, Chris, I'm going to start with you first. Like I said, simplifying some of the jargon. What's an investment policy statement, and why do our clients need to care?
Yeah, bringing up the term, and you guys are probably in the same boat. Bringing up the term investment policy statement for the first time, most people are they're unfamiliar with it.
You see if an eyes glaze over look.
For sure.
Really quick.
Occasionally, they might, this is for institutional business. But I think how we view it for the individual investor, is really simple. And I like to break it down into two parts. First, and it's, pretty self-explanatory, is setting that expectation, right? That's very important, especially in our industry. Talking about, expected or potential returns, talking about risk guidelines, that all comes down to communication, right? And especially if this is a new investor or a new client, we ask a lot of questions during that period of time. We listen, we try to understand, their financial goals. And, what's surprising, and Mike and Jude, you've written about this, in other articles, their experiences or their comfort level with risk is usually based off a past experience, right? If my mom and dad did well in the stock market, you're going to tend to be a little bit more aggressive, right? If your grandfather, you always heard those stories, lost all everything,
baby.
Yeah, right. And
put it on the mattress.
Yeah, I'm not going to do this, right? So uncovering that, sometimes takes a little bit longer, for us, especially during that initial conversation. But we're really just trying to find that mix that's right for the client. And then I think the other part is having a conversation about market volatility and portfolio construction. Market volatility is
throwing more jargon out. So.
Yeah, for sure. But market volatility, it's very difficult conversation to have, right?
Yeah.
The ups and downs of the stock market. How do you react to that? Again, most people, when the markets are higher, tend to be more aggressive. And, markets, we have a downturn, all of a sudden, they become more conservative. So I think, when we first started in the business, going through that questionnaire and just checking the box, I'm a moderate investor, that's not realistic. That's not the reality.
Well, it's not useful, right? What does that even mean? And it moderately aggressive, that means very different things depending on who's reading it, right?
99% of the people you talk to think they're moderate.
Yeah.
Then you talk to them and you're like, well, you're not moderate.
Well, depending. Yeah.
Or they're conservative and you're like, you're 30 years old and you have a 401k.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you're not going to touch it for 30 years.
Yeah.
So, so having those conversations and making that, not just on a piece of paper, but talking about that and learning about how that investor views risk, I think is important. And it's the purpose, of the investment policy statement.
I think what I like about it is it's a snapshot of just where you stand, but also it shows you where you're taking your risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have, retirement accounts for you and family members, and those are pretty aggressive, but you have an individual account that's sort of serving as your buffer, as your rainy day fund, right? Like, yes, your risk number tells you something, but now the next step is like, well, where am I taking it? All right, if I'm not touching this money for 30 years, like, I don't have to care. And that context, I think, provides a lot of value to people to let their heads hit the pillow and relax about it.
It does. And I think our industry is just like expectations are such a big thing, right? And like, so, when Chris was talking, I was thinking like, I almost like some people will perceive us as salespeople, but I take a backwards approach to selling when I'm talking about it. The IPS helps. If someone never invested in the stock market and they're sitting across the desk from me, I almost talk them out of it. I talk to them like, here, it's not sunshine and rainbows every day. You're going to make money over the long term, but then you start talking to them about other things. And then the IPS helps define those expectations for that person and helps them understand it a little bit better. And it works out well, I think.
So putting on you wear a few, I think we all wear a few hats, right? But one of your hats is running the retirement plan consulting business at Alliance. Chris mentioned sort of institutional business, right? The IPS, the investment policy statement, that's sort of like table stakes. You got to have it, right? Yep. When you get to individuals, when you get to families, that's not always the case. So one, maybe just looking at it from that perspective, how are we taking some of these things from that institutional side, right? Those organizations, those retirement plans, and bringing it to a household. And why is that useful?
Well, I think it's the practice of it is really the most applicable, because you put a policy in place, you both agree on it, and then you review it, because that's important, right? Like, things change. The change is constant in life, especially in your financial life. So that part of it is very, very similar. The IPS for the institutional business is different in a lot of ways, because it's more you're managing the funds and like a fund lineup. But we apply that to our portfolio construction. Our clients don't always see that, but we use those principles more behind the scenes with us as our team. But then we apply those same values, the same practices to the individual IPSs that we've created for every family that we work with. And so it's similar, but it's very similar, but very different, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But I think the ensuring, regardless of what the entity is, right, that one, expectations are set, they've been communicated effectively, and then the third one for me is one of our foundations, right? Like, know what you own, know why you own it. Well, I'm 80% stocks in this piece of the portfolio because this is my nest egg and I'm going to grow it over the next few decades, right? And this is for vacation next year. So those two things shouldn't be mixed up in your head, or you're going to have a lot of anxiety thinking like, market's down, is that going to impact my trip with my kids, right? So that knowing what you own and why you own it is kind of a simpler way to say a lot of this stuff. But I think like you see the light bulb go off there. Like, okay, yeah, you can talk about risk and volatility and all this stuff, like, but I'm good now because I understand what you're trying to do.
Yeah, it helps people tremendously, I think, when they could see those different buckets and say, all right, yeah, I'll put as much stock as you want in that retirement account. That makes sense, right? I'm not going to touch that for 30 years, but I can't put everything I have in stocks.
Into a retirement account.
Right.
Yeah, you want that optionality.
Yeah.
So this doesn't happen over, this happens over time. It doesn't happen right away. When you have this conversation for the first time, okay, I get it a little bit. The second year goes by, but as the third or fourth year, the confidence builds up. And, I know all of our experience, because we talked about this before, when we have that market downturn, a lot of people that have worked with us for 3 or 4 years, they didn't have the same reaction as that first year.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that confidence level, again, having that plan in place, the conversations are different, but knowing that it's in place, I think it helps with people making decisions.
That's a great point. Like, ideally, the phone is ringing less because they're just like they're all in on the process, and this is a big part of it. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I was going to go next. So I'll go back to you, Chris. A lot of this heavy lifting is, frankly, your baby. You've come up with a lot of it. We've refined it every year. I think it's such a value add. I think it's a differentiator, frankly, from other places that I've worked, at least. So talk about the IPS process, which is why we're having this conversation. What should new clients who maybe came in over the last 12 months and haven't sort of been through that conversation before, what should they be expecting? And then from Alliance's point of view, why is this useful?
Well, I think it's something that we try to incorporate within our practice. We have 3 major, campaigns throughout the year. This is one of them, focusing on investment management. And, I think as people's lives become more hectic, whether it's raising a family or just, working on your career, knowing that they have time set aside, or knowing that we're going to be proactive and this is something that we're going to review, I think also helps them, sleep at night. If there's a question that's going to come up, or if they're going to retire, or if a life event happens, they might have changed their job. Jude's going to call me, Mike's going to call me, Chris is going to call me, usually, in that second quarter of the year, just to go through the portfolio again. And I think that's one of the beneficial things that, we've had over the years. Clients, know that there's that time on the calendar that we're going to talk about that and make some of those adjustments if necessary.
How do you think about it? Because I think what's pretty cool about Alliance is I think we all come from a different place and we bring different things to the table, and every employee has a really important and valuable viewpoint on the same process. So like your IPS process with your clients is probably different than Chris's, is probably a little different than mine. So how do you think about this, and why is it a value to you as well as the client?
I mean, for me personally, it organized my practice such a significant change. Like I can't believe I'm saying this out loud. That's almost 5 years that I'm at Alliance now. But, I had some clients that I had been dealing with for many years that came to Alliance with me. Those people, like more than one, probably more than 5 or 10, have said to me, "You're so much more organized here," and it's great, it's, but they appreciate it.
Dude, I liked you before, but it's nice to see you get better at your job.
Yeah, exactly. And so that, for me, it's organization. It's a meaningful thing to touch base with people on, because time goes by so fast.
Yeah.
So there are some people that a year might go by and we hadn't talked, and you, because maybe just nothing crazy happened, or they didn't really need much. I didn't really have much to update them on. Things were kind of humming along.
Yeah, a lot of times the client's not interested.
Yeah, and I might have called them. I don't want to call anybody out, but I might have called them one time and they didn't call me back or something. But a year goes by, you didn't talk, and it's a reason to check in, and most of them are expecting that, which is big. And it also, it's time in their heads where, like, oh yeah, you know what, I do have to go talk to Jude. I need to update them on this or that. A lot of times when I call, like, they're ready for the call because they kind of knew I was going to be calling, and I've been meaning to call you, but I knew you were going to call me.
Right.
And so it's just it's a nice thing, and it took me a couple of years to get used to it. And then I've brought in some new business over the last couple of years while I'm here, and the new people love it too. I define it all up front. It's helped me. It's helped me tremendously, and it's made me better for my clients, which is obviously a win-win.
That's
for
the name
everybody.
of the game. Yeah, and I think to your point, a lot of times the clients pull out a list of like,
Yeah.
Hey, was waiting for this meeting. I know we usually meet this time of year. Here's some of the things that I wanted to make sure we covered, and so they feel not only proactive, but they feel more organized themselves, and that's a huge deal. Like, that's a de-stressor of, I know this is going to get taken care of when the time comes. So I don't know if you guys have any other thoughts. I mean, we want to keep this pretty quick. I think we have, but for all of our clients at Alliance, getting ready for this IPS season, as we call it, internally, I think, hopefully that's becoming an expectation and something that we're getting better at.
And we've done, and give credit to both of you, developing some resources within our Center for Investor Education. A lot of the stuff that we talked about here, we have a little bit more of a deep dive on that. So exploring that and looking at some of the stuff that we've put out there, that discuss all of these topics, that's available on our website as well to go through, and we could share that too.
Great. Well, thank you, boys, and we'll end it here. But I think we did okay with the first off the page episode.
Yep,
very good. Thank you.
Thanks.
The information in this interview is provided for informational purposes only and should not be taken as investment, legal, or tax advice. Opinions expressed in this interview are subject to change without notice. It is important to remember that investment in securities involves risk, including the potential loss of principal invested. Past performance is no guarantee of future results, and diversification does not guarantee a profit or protect against loss in a declining financial market. Alliance Wealth Advisors is an investment advisory firm that is independently owned and operated. Alliance does not make any representations as to the accuracy, timeliness, suitability, completeness, or relevance of any information prepared by this unaffiliated third party mentioned in this communication and takes no responsibility. For more information regarding Alliance, please visit alliancewealthadvisors.com/legal disclosures. Thank you.